Number one is a communication from the mayor relative to the appointment of Mr. Albert Abrams to the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners for the term ending June 30th, 2009.
Come forward and plead your case, sir. Why you would want such a position? Okay. All right. Well.
Good morning.
Good morning. I know we met yesterday,
Yes,
and you
we
told
did.
me how excited you are about this position, how you want to bring a sense of reasonableness to the commission.
Right. I think it's a combination of experience and common sense. We talked about that. I think the board is in need of that right now. The experience I've had in working on the Tarzana Neighborhood Council for the last 2.5 years has, I think, put me in a good place to understand the needs of pretty much all the neighborhood councils. So whatever contribution I can make from the board level, I think would be hopefully a positive contribution.
And there are 7 members on the commission, and I understand there's another vacancy, Mr. Logan.
I think that's a current vacancy. That's correct.
So what you will find is from different parts of the city: West LA, East Los Angeles Harbor, North Valley, South LA, East Los Angeles, South Valley, which is the representation that the mayor selected you for, that combination of folks from citywide to work on neighborhood councils to make sure that they run smooth. And while they were designed in the charter to be a smooth process, there have been some bumps in the road. And I think with your experience, from my personal knowledge, since you live in the 3rd Council District, I know you from the Neighborhood Council, your work on the Neighborhood Council, your level-headed attitude, common sense, demeanor, would be a wonderful fit to bring that sense from the Valley perspective to the Neighborhood Council. You ever been on any other commissions?
No.
In your history of the...
Not in the city, no.
Okay. And you're a married man with a wife and 2 beautiful daughters?
Thank you.
Right, Linda? I knew she'd be here.
They take after their mom.
They take after their mom. No, I know your the history of you in Tarzana, the beautiful community. And the mayor said you'd be a good man for this commission. I just hope that with all of the controversy sometimes surrounding, you don't get frustrated with it.
I appreciate
that happens on occasion. And this committee is focused on neighborhood councils. It was designed to make sure that they ran smooth. While they have an executive director, it's our purpose to make sure when problems occur, whatever we can do on the council level to help resolve them. But we try, when elections don't work as they're supposed to and other things, oftentimes people come to the local council member. We try to do is put it back to the neighborhood council and put it back to the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment and to the commission, try and resolve it. Otherwise, we'd be dealing with it constantly because there's oftentimes issues that come up that we look at the commission to say, fix it, or Department of Neighborhood Empowerment with their executive director, fix it. And I've set that standard in my community. But I know the Tarzana Neighborhood Council works extremely smooth.
Right.
From the Homeowners Association, the Neighborhood Council, the Chamber. I mean, they're all linked together in a very positive fashion.
Well, I think, that atmosphere of collegiality
Yes.
is going to be hopefully a hallmark of the board that I'm about to go on. It's extremely important that people work well together, positively together. I think you set a standard. We have close to 90 neighborhood councils now. Good morning, Councilman.
Good morning.
And we have close to 90 neighborhood councils. And many of them need help. They need support. They need assistance. They sometimes need training. And I think the board, one of the board's most important missions is to really help set a standard for neighborhood councils to look up to as to the way things can be done.
Right.
And so hopefully I can make that contribution.
Well, I know you've got the ability to do it, and hopefully with those other commissioners and working with the executive director who's somewhere. Is he? Where is he? He's somewhere. Ralph, is he here?
I don't see him yet.
He'll be here. He normally attends all these meetings. Mr. Alicant, who's the chair of the committee.
Yes.
We started a little early. I ended EERC, so came up here. And Mr. Abrams is up
We are
for.
going to be changing the meeting time to 9 o'clock.
you wanna-
Better accommodate your schedule. We just had to go through a formal process.
He's up to, because we have a meeting with the mayor called the Executive Employee Relations Committee, and it seems to happen at 8 o'clock, the same day that we have this at 8:45.
Oh, I see. That's
So
tough.
sometimes the hours overlap. But Mr. Abrams is scheduled for council this morning, and I met with him yesterday. I know him from the community of Tarzana where he lives.
Well, he didn't mention that, but we'll talk about that later.
The good part or the bad part?
The part about him knowing you.
You know what, I could choke you out right now, but I'll wait. So anyway, we want to-
Speaking of which.
There he is. There's the executive
I
director.
think collegiality is largely overplayed in politics. It many times gets in the way of pure political passion, and in a democracy, I think it has value, but as long as it doesn't get in the way of bringing out what people truly believe in. We've had a conversation. The only thing I wanted to point out is Mr. Abrams is well aware of my questions about whether or not we even need bonk, and he's committed to serving in the position and giving a fair assessment to bonk, and if it should be that extreme, that he would even work on the idea that maybe bonk is overplayed in terms of its initial or the initial reason why it was created might not be necessary. It might be an additional layer of bureaucracy that is unnecessary. And so I've asked him to keep an open mind. I haven't made any decisions, but given that there have been several meetings that have been canceled for good reason because of a lack of a quorum, and the neighborhood council system didn't sink into a big sinkhole or something. We may want to rethink the bonk, or either we go one way or the other. We either strive to give it more purpose, or perhaps we ask the voters to reconsider that aspect of the new neighborhood council system. But I think Mr. Abrams is a good selection, and I think he will give that every fair and concerned investigation. So.
See, I'd like to know how much turnover there is, because I learned yesterday that Dr. Logan is no longer on the commission, and most of the commissions that we have, whether it be the information technology or fire or transportation or police, whatever, folks who are appointed by the mayor normally stay the entire term, and it'd be interesting to see how much turnover there's been at the commission. And if there is an unusual amount of turnover, then we have to examine and say, why are people leaving? Are they leaving for other commissions? Or are they throwing in the towel because of frustration and inability to really get things done in a positive fashion?
I think that's an important observation to be had. Absolutely.
I was unaware that there was that. Apparently there's turnover, and I understand from previous discussions there's been a lack of a quorum, which means people aren't attending. They're on the commission. When you don't have a quorum, you can't do the meeting, which troubles me. If
In
you
the
have
case
a
of
commission,
bonk, I think it was more a case of a couple of extended illnesses or career changes or something,
but they weren't there.
It was an unusual situation, although there was some, I think, lack of attention as well.
See, that's the problem. Maybe we could have the executive directors here find out
At this
that.
point, I'm less concerned about, I think, obviously, we want bonk to have their meetings, but I'm
And there's turnover, too, is the problem.
What concerns me more is that there was no earth-shattering result from not having their meetings.
But like when we go on vacation for 2 weeks, the city doesn't fall apart.
You may have something there.
The mayor's out of town, the city's still here, so.
You know,
Because it got
I
screwed
think
in operation, maybe.
I think it's important. I think you're absolutely right. I think once I have an opportunity to be on that board, to feel it out, sense it out, see what what the mission is, see how it's applied, see what the real value and effectiveness is. I think that, even for my own sake, I think it's important, you know?
Absolutely. Everybody wants to be purposeful.
Absolutely. I mean, the time we
This would
give
be your
is
purpose.
Your purpose is now happening upon you.
now
Did you hear that?
evolving
That was
right in front of us.
Well, I don't see any problem with
No,
this
I think good
nomination.
recommendation.
Mr. Zine moves, and I second your nomination. In that matter, do we have one card? We do have one card, so we'll take that before voting. Zuma Dog with a double G.
This is Mr. Zumadog who has some comments.
Commissioner.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you. My name
Nice hat, nice hat.
It's $1 right here in the warehouse district, imported from China. Can you imagine to be able to buy it for $1?
Yeah.
All the way from China. That's why we can't compete with jobs, but that's a separate issue.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm very concerned about the neighborhood council system.
Or did you want to speak on this?
This is the commissioner
Yeah, item
appointment,
number
right?
one. Okay, go ahead.
Our nominee?
Yes, some things I'd like him to be aware of if you're on the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners. I'm concerned, first of all, in the elections by the city clerk, complete debacle, absentee ballots arriving after the election.
Mr. Dog?
Yes.
Can you please address your comments to the committee? Thank you.
Yes.
And maybe you can be specific about our commissioner,
Yeah,
our
well-
potential commissioner.
Yeah,
Well,
you can say the same thing, just address your comments to the
Okay,
committee.
so anyway, they botched the election, we'll hear more about that later. Also, council members, it doesn't do any good to have an independent neighborhood council system if you have council members who are backing their own candidates specifically to knock other people out of the box and getting churches involved. And when you have LAUSD employees taking memos with the slate of candidates and then giving it to kids and saying, here, go vote, you know, to 13, 14-year-olds, well, that's not in the spirit, and I believe it's a violation of the Federal Voting Rights Act. And overall, just again, I'm very concerned that the neighborhood council system, see, it's supposed to be an independent body. However, if City Hall, I believe City Hall has corruption at the top, and then, of course, it's going to trickle down to the city council level. So if neighborhood council is an extension of a corrupt system, well, all we've done is created a larger system of corruption, more bureaucracy. I don't feel it represents the communities at all. I feel it's a RICO violation, racketeering, and I
Are you
believe
speaking of Mr. Abrams?
things I wanted to be aware of as a neighborhood commissioner. Things I wanted to be aware of. Thank you.
Okay. I vote for the recommendation.
It's been moved and seconded and approved. Thank you, Mr. Abrams.
Thank you, and good morning. Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Thank you.
Item number 2 is a verbal presentation by the city clerk in response to a motion Alarcon Garcetti relative to the June 2008 elections process for the board elections of 22 neighborhood councils.
Good morning.
Morning.
Please.
Karen Kalfine, the interim city clerk. Mr. Alarcon introduced a motion requesting the city clerk to report on the 2008 elections process for the 22 neighborhood council elections that we conducted in the previous few weeks. As you're aware, the council approved the transfer of the responsibility for conducting the neighborhood council elections from Dunn to the city clerk back in December, and then final adoption of the ordinance transferring that responsibility was approved at the end of February. That, of course, gave us a very short time frame in which to establish and implement the new process. Much of the material used in these elections had to either be created or modified. For example, the election procedures needed to be modified. The neighborhood council bylaws needed to be updated. Informational material was developed, staff hired and trained, candidate filing packets created, and so on. So we understood at the outset of this process that this was going to be a learning experience, and there would be areas that we're going to want to evaluate afterwards so that improvements can be made for the 2010 elections. Now, we conducted 22 elections in June. One was actually on the 1st of July. And then the final election results have been certified and posted now. We're currently addressing challenges that we've received from some of the elections. We did receive a few, and our responses to that will be completed in the next couple of weeks. Plus, we're going to be following up with the neighborhood councils to get their feedback so that we can incorporate their feedback, plus the things that we've observed, so that we can use that in the 2010 elections. Now, what I'd like to do is just kind of explain a little more about what our process was and what we did leading up to the elections. Basically, as I said, this was originally approved by the council in December and finally approved in February. So in January, we got our staff hired. We held 6 regional information meetings. Dunn also participated in those, where we gave general information about the shift from the city to the city clerk to all the neighborhood councils. We met in those areas. Those were regional meetings. We gave them information about the neighborhood the election procedures, some of the things that had changed, like the vote by mail procedures, the participation of stakeholders on a factual basis, and so on. Then in February, I mentioned that the final ordinance was adopted. In March, we also held regional meetings with the neighborhood councils so that they could select their election day. That was done by region, and by a consensus of those neighborhood councils, they decided on what election day the region would hold its elections. And then each of the neighborhood councils decided on the time that their election would take place. We went through, again, the election process, answered questions. Dunn was busy working on the bylaws updates, which I don't want to diminish how much work went into that, because that was a big factor in the conduct of the elections. We started preparing mailers, developing election material. In April, we held stakeholder and candidate information meetings with each of the neighborhood councils. We had 2 per neighborhood council, so we've actually had 45 meetings. We had 1 extra one that we had scheduled. We had meetings with stakeholders and candidates to provide information about the neighborhood council election process. Running for office provided an opportunity to ask questions. Same with for candidates, to give them an opportunity to ask questions about the candidate filing process and to complete candidate filing packets. We had candidate filing in April and May. The elections were held by region in June. And right now, that brings us to now. We've certified the election results. We're dealing with the challenges. We'll be responding to each of those formally, where we received a formal challenge. And we're also going to we've scheduled for next week a meeting with, an open meeting with neighborhood council so that they can give us their input. We want to get their feedback on how the elections went, both positive and not so positive, any input we have, so that we can incorporate those into our next round. We want to do this while it's fresh in everybody's mind, and so that we can get this down. And of course, we want to wrap most of this up by mid-August, so that, because we need to also start to shift our focus to the municipal elections next year. And then after those are completed, we're going to get back into the next round of neighborhood council elections. We want to have as much information as possible so that we can improve the process. So that's basically what we did. I think there are some things that have been raised in the public comment from the last meeting and in some of the challenges that we've looked at so far. There's some clearly some areas that I think they've raised some good points, and we want to review those. We want to see what we can do to improve. I think one gentleman had mentioned just the distribution lists. We mailed to addresses within the neighborhood council district. The issue that raises is there are people outside of a district who may participate in an election. They may work in the area. They may have some other stake in that neighborhood. We need to find a good way of reaching all of the people who might be able to participate in a specific neighborhood council election. Some of that's going to require some outreach. I think we need to partner with Dunn and with their outreach program. Is how do you reach those people so that enough people can participate when they have a stake. We want to look at the vote by mail procedures again. There are some things that probably need to be tightened up there. Same as somebody had raised the issue of polling sites and ADA compliance. They all were ADA compliant, but there are some polling sites that we probably want to look at as to whether we use them again. There was a couple of polling sites where we couldn't get the first choice because they weren't available, and so we went to a second choice, and that second choice probably wouldn't have been as good as the first choice had it been available. So there are issues like that, and I think we want to work through them. We want to hear from the neighborhood councils because we want to make this a better process the next time around.
First of all, you said you managed 22 elections in June and July.
That's correct.
In the neighborhood council system. How many of those elections resulted in challenges?
1 second. There were 6. Well, there were six that resulted in letters challenging. Some of those, one in particular, had to do more with bylaws, a bylaws
I'm just
issue.
asking,
So,
how many resulted in challenges? How many elections?
6.
There were 6 challenges, or there were 6
There were
resulted in?
There were 6. There were challenges on 6 different ones, but each of those may have been like one letter or something like that.
6 out of 22.
But
Right.
that's all I want to know.
Yeah, 6.
So that means that out of 22, 16 did not have any challenges.
That's correct.
And I'm assuming those were certified, the 16?
All of them have been certified,
All of them have been certified.
and what we're doing now is responding to those challenges.
Okay.
So the challenges were investigated?
We are doing that now.
Okay, so what is the process for a challenge or an appeal or protest? What happens?
Well, with a challenge, whoever wants to file a challenge has to do that formally in writing to our office. There was a period of time in which
Now,
they
are
needed to do
are they
that.
challenging the election?
Well, some of the challenges are in some of them they're pointing out what they believe are deficiencies in the process. Some of them won't necessarily result in a challenge to an election.
Okay, so what is the formal definition of a challenge? The challenge would be that would change the results, like change votes or redo an election.
Well,
that would be, to me, a challenge. Anything that just says, well, we think you could have done this better, it's not really a challenge. It's just,
we're calling any of the letters that we received under that challenge process a challenge. But let me point out that many of them wouldn't result in any sort of a challenge to the election. It wouldn't result in a candidate being.
let me say this.
Okay.
In some of these challenges, the people who are writing the challenges are not necessarily asking for any kind of remedy.
Not necessarily, no.
Okay, how many of those did you get?
Where they're not asking for a remedy?
I'm talking about the elections, not the challenges. But of the 6 challenged elections, how many of those have letters that aren't really asking for any kind of remedy, just suggesting improvements to the process?
I'll have to run through them again, but I would say 1 or 2 of them may have said that they thought that the election should be redone. Except that I'm saying that
Okay, I'm asking
you're the other way around.
Respectively, yeah. How many of the elections, if you excluded those that are not asking for any particular remedy but merely making suggestions, how many how many elections would have been challenged?
Well, I would want to say 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
going to come back with a more complete.
Right, and what I'm saying is
So you're
even
suggesting that
those
4 of them received letters that were more suggestions for improvement.
more or less, yes.
So that possibly out of the 22 elections, only 2 have formal challenges, and 20 essentially will stand without any significant protest.
Right, and as we go through even the other 2, those may not, even though they ask for a remedy, the remedy may not
We
necessarily.
all understand.
Yeah, okay. I just want to make that clear.
You have investigations to do.
Right.
With regard to the voting process, it's still a self-certification, right?
In some cases it is, and in other cases it isn't. What we did is we honored the bylaws that were in place. So there was a mixed bag. Some of them, you came forward and you had to certify that you had a stake. They signed a stakeholder form and signed under penalty of perjury that they were a stakeholder in that district. In other cases, if the bylaws for that neighborhood council had some form of identification requirement, that was honored for those.
Okay. We have a number of cards on this. Where you were, I was asking what the appeal process is, and you were saying.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. There really isn't an appeal process. What the election procedures allow for is you can file a challenge, and the city clerk is the final decision maker on those challenges. So what we're doing is we're going through and we're going to be responding formally to each of the letters that we've received. What the procedures also say is that we transmit them to Bonk, but Bonk doesn't have any role in, there's no appeal process set forth now. There will be once the regional grievance process is put in place, but in this interim period of time, pardon me?
When will that be put in place?
That one I'd have to defer to Dunn on that one.
That's separate from the election.
It's separate, yeah. In this interim,
in this
interim
period. If you could talk
we
about
were-
the process again, I want to get clear. Now, what drives you to do a thorough investigation and make sure that you're not just saying, hey, well.
Oh, no, we do.
Well, what drives you to do that? Why?
Because that's the fair process, and we have an obligation to review any of these.
What happens if you don't? What consequences does the city clerk face? I mean, why should you do a thorough investigation?
Well, I feel that's our responsibility to do a thorough investigation and a fair one, and that's our.
So you think it's enough for the public to think that you're a
Well,
passionate civil servant who wants to do the right thing?
Well, I don't know
I think
that-
the city attorney knows the more compelling reason is because we could get sued and it could end up in court. Is that?
Arguably, I mean, we haven't gone that far, but the city clerk has a duty and obligation to exercise her role responsibly.
And we know you take that very passionately, but for those who might question that, there is an option to, I suppose, file in court.
There's always an option with respect to any city department, whether it can prevail. It's a whole other
So
Yeah.
it
And
compels you to
similarly-
do a thorough investigation and proper analysis, because if you don't, we could end up in a situation in court.
Absolutely.
If somebody can.
Yeah, and similarly, that's also the process with a regular municipal election. That
Right.
So
Now, I know that I use the example of my father going to vote, and I wasn't on the ballot, but Rita Walters was. And for those of you that don't know, I represent the Northeast San Fernando Valley, and Rita Walters at the time represented Central LA, and so he did vote for her, but that was obviously a mistake. They corrected it by, I think, 10 o'clock. But there were even though it was clearly an error, the question was, did it affect the election
outcome.
results? And so, at the end of the day, I think that question was satisfied, so there was never an issue. But those kinds of things happen.
yeah, and let me also point out that we did have a couple of challenges as I'm describing them, letters where we did look into them and we did resolve it satisfactorily, and those were also withdrawn. So what we're dealing with now are the ones that are left, and we do want to go through those and do a proper review.
Okay, with that, we have quite a few cards, so I'm gonna limit people to 1 minute. So get your statement in order. Please try not to be redundant for your own sake. Try to get to the point as quickly as possible, and I'm going to take these in order as they were received. Lisa Baca?
Good morning. I was a candidate in the Greater Echo Park Elysian Neighborhood Council, and I would like to, for my own personal, just state for the record, there were learning curve issues, but my experience from the moment I went to the candidate information meeting, filing the packets, my experience as a candidate, the city clerk was always available to me, email, telephone, in person, and I believe they did an excellent job. As a result of my election in my neighborhood council, the turnout was the best it's ever been, almost 3-to-1. It was very professional, and the city clerk did have to deal with a lot of different personalities, but it was a very robust campaign. And I want to just go on record as acknowledging the city clerk for their efforts.
And you won the election.
I was the highest vote getter, yes.
Typically, the winners think the election went very smoothly.
But I also worked very hard. I was campaigning in front of schools and going door to door.
What was total vote
Okay.
count, total, for everyone?
Thank you. Do you know?
770, for mine?
No, for the whole thing, for the neighborhood council.
How many people showed up?
How many people voted?
771 in ours, or 778.
771.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ida Talala?
Good morning. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share some insights. This election was one of the better run ones in the ones that I've gone to. I think the city clerk did an admirable job. However, there are things that need to be improved, and those things that need to be improved are serious. And that unless, and I know that the opposition stated that we did not run a good campaign. I think we did. I certainly worked very hard. The last time I ran against a dead candidate who served for 9 months, and nobody thought anything of that.
Did you win?
The last time? No. This time, yes. With the highest votes for a district
You lost
representative.
to a dead candidate?
Yes, I did, sir.
That must have been heart-wrenching.
It was gut-wrenching. I don't want to relive this again. However, I think I learned a great deal, and I applied those lessons. Unless you are a Native American, America today is very much an immigrant experience. A feature of this American experience is the election, which is a reflection of the democratic process that is the foundation stone that binds us all. And this process took place. The opposition did not believe that minorities had a voice. However, this is a reflection of national and local.
What kind of things do you think could
Thank
be
you.
improved? What kind of things do you think could be improved with the city clerk? You said there were several things that you thought.
There needs to be more in languages. I campaigned in Korean and Chinese. There's a small group, but it is bad business if you just wave them off. We need it in different languages. We need the information to go out in Hispanic and English at the same time. We need voter rights expressed. We need to have better articulation, like the ballots. It didn't have the request to register to vote, did not have the date of the when it should be mailed. So we had to go back and look at original materials, which by now we threw away. So we had to.
Okay.
So there were many things that, and I would be more than happy.
I actually would appreciate it if you submit a letter to.
Yeah, we'd like
I
to see
would.
those. Okay,
Thank you so much for
Not as a
this.
protest, but just as information.
Yes, absolutely, I would be delighted. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
You won your election as well?
I did.
And you.
And
also
I'm
think
very
it was-
glad.
It was a well-run election.
As far as I was concerned, I had an easier time this round, but I worked harder. Thank you.
Yeah. And you ran against a live candidate.
Yes, many. 6.
Huh.
Thank you very much.
Those guys are-
That'll teach them to put a live candidate up against you. Augustine Sabata?
I'm a member of I'm a representative from District 2, Greater Echo Park Elysian Neighborhood Council, and my concerns are the question of, mentioned briefly by Ms. Talala about I feel it's the disenfranchisement of the Spanish-speaking community, because the notice was only sent out in Spanish, in English, and the bottom of the notification for the election, which was sent to every mailing address within the district, within Jepanek district, It only had a little line in the bottom in Spanish. If
They
you
actually
want,
call it Jepanek?
Jepanek, yeah, Greater Echo Park Elysian Neighborhood Council,
Got to come up with
Jepanek.
something simpler.
Yeah, it's easier than going through all that other stuff. Anyhow, so this notification was only sent in English, and the vast majority of the people in Echo Park are Latino and a lot of Spanish-speaking people, and that is a base that my compañera, who just got reelected, Nora Sanchez, that we work with a lot in representation in the schools and all that area, and it's very important that that be done. Also, too, one last thing that I wanted to mention was the question of participation by so-called non-profit organizations using of their resources and everything within the election, and I think that that should be policed because under federal law, the 501(c)(3)s, which are very important or involved there in Echo Park, should be controlled. The using of their resources for the election, I think, is illegal, and it was done systematically.
Yeah, your time is up, but let me just say that that's not correct. For the record, nonprofit corporations are entitled to use a small portion of their receipts for political purposes, not necessarily getting involved in elections, but they can certainly make it depends on how their bylaws are written, and it depends on the interpretation of the IRS. Sometimes
Well, the language of the IRS is that you
all
cannot,
I'm saying is
for
that your time
people
is
who are
up.
being elected.
Your time is up.
Okay.
All I'm saying is that it's not necessarily true. It depends on what the activity was, how much of their total budget it involved, and how they did it. Really, I mean, so it's not necessarily true. I don't want people to go off on a wild goose chase. Hugo Pacheco. I also don't think candidates ought to reach out to nonprofits, ask for them to use their resources for elections, but I'm just talking legally.
Yes, my name is Hugo Pacheco, and I was a candidate in Lincoln Heights Neighborhood Council, and I can tell you that the city clerk did a horrible job. From the federal standpoint,
Did you win?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I have won before, so there's a question of winning and losing.
Did you
It can
win
go
against,
either way.
Did you run against a live person?
Yes, I did. But aside from that, so that my time doesn't run out, sir.
I'll
Okay.
take you-
Otherwise, you're taking my time, and that's not nice.
Don't worry, I'll
Okay.
correct it.
What I wanted to say is that you cannot have two standards. You cannot have standards for the citizens of the city of LA and those for the stakeholders. And what you've done by creating the city clerk's taking over of this election, you've gone back to the same old excuse. Gee, it's a learning process. It's a learning curve. That's what we've been listening for the last 6 years. And here we go again. Now the city clerk says it's a learning curve. But how can it be? They have the same people that they had involved in the elections before working for them. That cannot be true. Thank you.
What exactly?
Yeah, specific.
What exactly was the problem?
What are some?
Well, you had Mr. Cantu, who had been involved in our elections, not the last time, but the previous time before.
Who's Mr. Cantu?
He was the, what do they call him, elections administrator?
Yeah.
I can't exactly
He's the city
remember.
clerk guy?
The city clerk.
Okay.
So you have a person that has already been there, and yet the city clerk comes and tells you that they're into a learning curve here. It doesn't make sense. He's already had the experience before, and then we went before him, before I went before city council to tell you that there was a
Well,
problem.
What was wrong with the problem? Outside of this general notion of a learning curve, the comments were referencing the 22 elections, not one particular election. What was the specific concern about your election that you experienced?
Okay, when you say 22, I cannot talk about the 22, I can talk about mine,
I know, she was talking about
right?
the 22, and you're trying to change her words. She didn't say that there wasn't any experience in any of the elections. She said that it was a learning curve relative to the 22 elections. So it doesn't necessarily apply to your election, but can you tell me what your problem specifically with the process at your election in Lincoln Heights?
Let me say something even more important, sir. I'm not here to argue with you. You're a pretty good person in terms of talking.
I'm not arguing.
And what you're saying
I'm
to
just
me right
trying-
now is trying to frame this conversation as if my particular, the election that I was involved in is somehow different from the rest. I have no, hold on,
I'm not
don't,
doing that at all.
well, see, if it becomes an argument. I don't want to argue with you. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to present.
What can we do better?
Right.
What could the city clerk do better?
Actually, if you take a look at the Federal Voting Rights Act and you use that as your rule, because I know that's the rule that the city has to do when it does municipal elections, then the thing would be fixed. But when you say, hey, we have to go to each individual neighborhood council, they all have different bylaws, we have to go by their bylaws, and therefore it confuses us, and we can't handle it all at one time, then you say, wait a minute, something's wrong here. So why should my community be less respected, less honored, less taken care of than another community? Let's say a community that has a lot of attorneys that know what they're doing when they're putting their bylaws together, and they make sure that everything's run right. And mine, who happens to be full of problems from day one, the city clerk says, gee, we ran it full of problems, that's okay. We're going to address those challenges. But this one, okay, we ran it just like the attorney said, and that's fine with us. We'll take care of the challenges.
Okay, I think-
The problem is, those people are no better than me, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I understand your comment. Okay, Russell Brown.
Morning. I'm Russell Brown. I'm president of Downtown LA Neighborhood Council. I want to commend the city clerk for a huge amount of hard work that they did, and also have some recommendations. We had 67 candidates running for 28 positions. Wow. We had over 1,800 people vote with vote-by-mail applications and voting that day. We actually had to call the purple shirt security because we had so many people show up to vote at one time that it shut down all the businesses on Broadway. A couple of changes. The city clerk required us to only have a 6-hour time frame. What we ended up finding is we did that from 2 to 8. It necessitated most everybody could not vote during the lunch hour, but that was the only way we could sort of get the people in the evening that also needed to vote. So that needs to be expanded so you can have a little bit more flexibility there. The vote-by-mail ballots did go out late, but we were also in the first round, but they also extended the deadline up to the day of the elections. There was one generic form that was almost impossible to decipher. It was both a vote by mail and a candidate application form with 28 different people running in about 19 different categories. Trying to do all that in 11 by 17 form was really, really impossible. And we also found a lot of our own internal mechanics we're going to need to sort of change ourselves to make it a little bit more inclusive. There really wasn't a partnership because of the time constraints with the city clerk's office in the individual forms and how the outreach was done. It was more sort of one size fits all. I don't think that works very well. So the neighborhood councils really have to form a partnership with the city clerk, that you have customized materials that people can figure out. I spent probably 20 hours a week doing the election, and I was lost and confused a lot of times, so I could understand why brand new people were lost and confused.
Mr. Brown, your time is up, but have you submitted these comments in writing?
I will.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Dog?
Yes, I'm in response to Councilmember Hahn asking what better could be done. First of all, remember the city clerk, it takes city money and the city takes federal money, so I believe that these neighborhood council elections need to operate under city clerk, federal voting right guidelines. That means no ninth graders, okay? That means no ninth graders showing up without IDs. That means also with the ballots, yes, some of the absentee ballots were received after the election. Absentee ballots were not counted. Some friends of mine went over to the clerk's office and said, could we see everything? And those absentee ballots weren't counted. Then they go, oops, sorry, we forgot the absentee ballots. Well, isn't that convenient? No standardization. You can't be having all these different systems with all types of different definitions. 13-year-olds can vote in this one, not in that one. Definitions of stakeholders needs to be standardizations, very vague. You shouldn't be able to have, I could say, oh, I show up to buy a pack of zigzag papers in Westlake or wherever, and then I'm a stakeholder. And briefly, 16-piece mailer doesn't help. And absentee ballots, they were told you have to bring your absentee ballot to the election to turn it in the day. Well, the purpose of an absentee ballot is because you can't show up that day. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask the city attorney, are we, under the neighborhood council system, does it apply to the Voting Rights Act?
No, not currently. Gwen Poindexter, city attorney, this went way back to the beginning of time.
I'm sure the question came up
It
earlier.
has, and we've analyzed this before and determined that the state laws, the federal laws with respect to neighborhood council elections don't apply, and if they did, then you wouldn't have age limits. You'd have age limits, and you'd have only registered voters in the city of LA being able to vote in neighborhood council elections, which would totally destroy the concept of stakeholder, which is more expansive under the city charter. So it appears that there was never an intention, based on the city charter definition, of having the elections follow the state election code.
But there are other laws that apply to things like discrimination and
There are,
and,
correct.
and that do play into our system.
That is correct.
And local, state, and federal laws that impact the way we conduct this process, although the Voting Rights Act is not controlling this election process.
Right. The Voting Rights Act is a different concept dealing with elected
And
officials.
you know, several people have raised that question. I think there are probably many council members who agree, but this process was developed literally neighborhood council by neighborhood council, and they developed their own systems. And so, as confusing as it is, it's just as confusing for us folks. So, but you know, we've determined that that's what the voters wanted when they wanted the neighborhood council system. Okay, Christine Peters.
Good morning, council members. Christine Peters, resident of Echo Park and a current board member of the Greater Echo Park Elysian Neighborhood Council. A few things about the city clerk run elections that I found very disappointing. First and foremost, I do feel like they were rushed. I was in the minority on our board. I voted against the city clerk running our elections. I felt it was too soon. I didn't think they had enough time to prepare. I felt that the June 3rd municipal elections were going to conflict with their ability to run our elections, which turned out to be true. They were not able to send out the vote-by-mail ballots on time. They couldn't do it until after the June 3rd election, which meant that our ballots needed to be returned by June 9th, and we were not going to receive them before June 7th, which on a Saturday makes it impossible. So then they just made a sort of random decision to extend the deadline to the 12th, but that wasn't communicated to the stakeholder. It was only communicated to persons like myself who complained. So that was a huge problem, I felt. One of the other problems is our board has been in existence since 2002. All of our elections have always had an independent election administrator. We have always had an individual on our board who was not running as a candidate, dealing with, at that time, done. Now, in this case, we were dealing with the city clerk. A sitting board member who was a candidate was the sole contact person with the city clerk's office for our election. I felt that was, if nothing else, not a good idea. It should have been a person not running as a candidate. It didn't reflect well on the transparency of all of those issues that were being dealt with the city clerk. Vote-by-mail ballots really need to be dealt with. We had an individual who returned 2 giant bags full of vote-by-mail ballots to the polling place during the election. The spirit of vote-by-mail is you can't be there, you send your ballot in, or you sign it over to somebody because you're incapacitated and you're unable to get there. But one individual turning in somewhere between 50 to 100 ballots has to be, if nothing else, suspect. So I think that really needs to be looked at, is how many ballots can one person turn in? I mean, it didn't look good in my eyes, and I think the city clerk should have made those be provisional and really do an investigation as to who signed them and how they got there. The other issue, the age of voting. We have a 16-year-old age limit. You must be 16. You should have a letter in your file that someone who was not able to be here sent in. She was in line and she has sworn testimony. The city clerk asked the 3 children in front of her, "Are you 16?" They said no. She gave them ballots. So there were a lot of problems in our election, and there are things that the city clerk really needs to deal with. I do not feel that the city clerk had enough time to prepare for this election, and they've admitted it themselves that there's a learning curve. Well, we, the stakeholders, should not be subjected to a learning curve. We should have the same rights as you as candidates in a municipal election and should be handled that way. We had electioneering in our campaign. They didn't limit the...
Yeah, your time.
the space.
your time.
So I'll
Did you
hand all of
submit
that
it?
in.
Did you submit all this in writing?
Yes, I will.
Please do.
But again, just to remind everybody, didn't every neighborhood council had the option of either running it themselves
Yes.
or?
I was in the minority vote
So
against the
clearly
city clerk.
your
Yeah.
board
Yeah.
voted to
Yeah.
go.
Yep.
And in terms of the person that dealt with, isn't that something that the board could decide?
We should
in
have
the
decided it,
future?
but we were not given the opportunity.
I think
Okay.
that
So, I mean,
may.
those are some of those
Yeah.
complaints. I think your own neighborhood council could deal with.
Absolutely. No, we should, and it should be
Well,
done that
first
way.
of all, if-
It should be mandated, though.
Yeah, if in fact that occurred, we probably will want to change that. But
Yeah, no, they definitely need to be changed.
Bennett Kaiser?
Bennett was a charter commissioner. He was like elected charter commissioner. Who's yours? He was on with that.
Commissioner.
Hello, Commissioner.
Bennett, you want to?
Three of us in the
Commissioners.
same room.
Yes.
Right.
And
Fine.
council members, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak. My name is Bennett Kaiser. I'm currently the Vice President of the Greater Echo Park Elysian Neighborhood Council. And I have some comment. I was the one who drafted primarily the challenge to our election. Ms. Peters mentioned a number of things that went wrong. I could sit here easily for another 15 to 30 minutes and extend that list. We don't think that there was any malfeasance on the part of the city clerk, but the city clerk was overwhelmed. And as a result, it could have and probably did affect the outcome of our elections. There were ballots that were turned in without signatures on the absentee ballots, so the ballots were removed and came back later with signatures on them. The notice, the city clerk mentioned that there were community meetings regarding the election format and vote by mail and so on. The notice was sent out by the city clerk so that the notice was received after the date of the community meetings. So there were just a handful of people rather than the community coming out.
Mr. Kaiser, I know you submitted your comments in writing. Your time is up, but
I would hope I could have another minute or two.
well, I can't give any more special treatment than I have to anybody else.
He was a former charter commissioner. I think that he deserves an extra minute.
I don't. I think everybody gets the same treatment.
I would just
extent
like to
possible.
say-
But recognizing that you've submitted a very lengthy document to
Yeah,
explain your-
that wasn't actually the reason that I wanted to speak to you. The reason I wanted to speak to you is the fact that the city clerk is reviewing our challenge.
Right.
And that seems to me like a very blatant conflict of interest. Under Section 222 of our charter, my favorite charter, it says that if there's a conflict of interest, there should be a board of referred powers to take over the findings, searching for findings as to whether or not there were problems. Now, if there was an issue with our election that had to do with, I don't know, ADA issues or something,
Okay, well,
then
let me say
the
this,
city
Mr.
clerk
Kaiser,
could do
I'm
that.
going to have to cut you off because I cut other people off. I've got to do the same with you. But I would suggest that...
You could ask me a few questions if you'd like.
no,
Maybe
because
the other
there is
members-
another item on the agenda that I want to get to that's very important.
And we have council.
And also,
that's,
and we have council.
20
So
minutes.
what I would like you to do, though, is
Well, I'm
submit
hoping
your-
that this committee would...
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
I would like you to submit your comments to the city attorney as to the question of whether you believe there's a conflict of interest, and the city attorney can then respond. I don't know whether there is or not. But that's their job.
We've chatted
Okay.
already.
Okay.
We've had
Thank
a
you very much, Mr. Kaiser.
I mean, I think that's
Andrew
something
Garston.
that the whole committee would like to get
Sure.
back a report on. I mean, this is a
Well, I
very
don't know about a whole report, but
Well, I mean, I'd like to know overall if the challenges is specifically about how the city clerk handled it, and then we have the city clerk reviewing those challenges. Is that a problem?
The city clerk's attitude...
wait, Mr. Kaiser. I'm not going to tell you again. Please.
We've discussed it. I've discussed it with the city attorney section that handles the election component with the city clerk, and we believe that there isn't a conflict of interest. We believe, based on your inquiries to the city clerk in that regard, that the city clerk has a duty and an obligation to evaluate and investigate, and we presume that they will perform that duty in good faith. And again, if there is a problem, there's always a judicial challenge.
And did the review commission, did you all take that up when you made the recommendation that the city clerk take over the elections? I think this is kind of at the crux of how we move forward.
Rafe Sunshine Neighborhood Council Review Commission, we did consider this, and the city clerk had asked in the long run not to have this role lodged in them. They knew they would have to do it in the short run, but we had assumed, and it will happen, that the process of appeal that's being designed right now, that will be in place before 2010, would have a peer grievance process where neighborhood councils themselves would do it.
In city council, when I questioned the city clerk's action, I sued the city and I won, and the city clerk changed. If you feel that the city clerk has acted inappropriately, sue the city, and you may win too.
But we're hoping not to have to go that far.
I know. I didn't like doing it. It cost me a lot of money.
We don't have to do that either.
What I want to point out, though, is that
that is the appeal process.
The city clerk did not insist on having this authority. What happened was there was no other place for it to go right now. In fact, it would have been their preference in the long run, as we're going to do, to lodge it somewhere else. But it would seem like an overreaction to find a whole other system to operate it just for this one election, because we assumed, and I think
And how do you
can
envision
assume,
this appeal process working?
that this would be part of the peer grievance process of complaints in general that would go to a panel of neighborhood council people who would evaluate these things.
Okay.
And that was, the city clerk wanted us to do that as well, so that they wouldn't end up in this role. But this is a role that there really is no other place for it to go, and we had a lot of faith in the city clerk's integrity, and still do, that they would do their best, honest, most attempt to resolve these grievances.
I want to, that we have to segregate that there's two different things going on here. One is a question of conflict of interest. I take that very seriously. That is an accusation that challenges the integrity of the city clerk. I don't take that lightly. The city attorney has opined that there is no conflict of interest. The question of how we improve the system is separate and apart. But let's be clear on what we're doing. I'm all for improving the system, but I don't take random comments of conflict of interest.
It wasn't random.
Okay, I grant you that much, but I don't take those accusations lightly. Those are very serious accusations, and so but I think it's important for us to distinguish between the two.
I just wanted to get a sense of where we're going from now, and let me just say, I mean, it's all great that someone can sue, but for me, and I think those of us who were on the original Charter Commission, part of it was to restore a feeling of empowerment to people in the neighborhoods, and it wasn't just if you don't like it, sue. I mean, we came in 1997 and had the whole city feeling disenfranchised from city government. People weren't voting in municipal elections, and there was just a real sense people wanted to leave the city. They were so unhappy. We were trying to set up a system that gave people back that feeling of our vote does count, what we say matters. So all these things weren't just about if you don't like it, sue. That wasn't what we wanted to create. We wanted to create a feeling where we restored trust in people about government.
Well,
So
I hope you're not suggesting that was my intent.
No.
Remember, I helped
just-
create the Charter Commission that you, Mr. Kaiser, and Mr. Zine served on.
I'm not saying that.
My
I'm just-
intent was to help Pacoima get some representation as well.
That's
but,
fine.
But
I'm
I don't
just trying-
appreciate the context that you put that, Ms.
No, I'm just saying I'm very interested in these elections. I'm very
so am I.
interested and I'm not saying
I'm the
you're
chair
not.
of the committee, but there's an implication, and I don't appreciate
arguing
it.
with you.
I
I'm not arguing
Chair,
with
we
you.
have 10 minutes
Because
left.
cordiality is largely overplayed. But that refers to a comment earlier. Never mind. We'll talk about it later. But
Anyway,
I think
I appreciate you
I'm
saying
all for the integrity of the process, but frankly, I don't believe there's a conflict of interest. The city clerk deals with appeal processes in just about every election they conduct. And when there are challenges, it goes to court. Now, if there is a board of referred powers or something like that, I don't mind that suggestion,
And an appeal
and
to
it's
the
something
city
that should be
council.
analyzed. If we can come up with something,
Section
I'm all for it.
245.
But to suggest that because I question the comment or merely make a comment about the process, that I'm somehow
If I might make one closing
No,
sentence.
no, I'm going to Andrew Garston. Andrew Garston, I think we've said far too much.
We've run
So
out of time.
The city clerk's goal is right now to cover the city clerk's tail, not to see what will make the election better.
I assume you lost your election as well?
I don't know, because right now we're still waiting to look at the ballots.
Okay.
The city clerk won't give us the envelopes to look at until after the election is closed out.
Okay.
That seems to me to be a conflict of interest.
Okay, and that is in your letter?
Pardon?
That is in your challenge letter?
Actually, not the part about withholding the envelopes, that just came up last
No.
week.
Okay. Mr. Garston?
Andrew Garston, one of the founding board members of the Greater Echo Park Elysian Neighborhood Council, and on the board for the last 5 years. And I was the leader of the group of people that actually conducted the first election of the Neighborhood Council, where I think we did actually, through sheer enthusiasm, have about 1,000 voters come. So it was our largest one to date. And it went down steadily from there. I don't really want to get into a lot of the detailed issues. The last year I've been the chair of the Elections and Bylaws Committee. I actually was a proponent of having the city clerk take over the elections, and the main reason is that if we didn't, it was going to be my committee's responsibility. And I've seen what's happened with the previous year's committees and how difficult it is to, hey, kids, let's put on an election, which is what we've been doing all these years. So difficult to deal with conflicts within the community, people vying for things, people gaming the system, and it was all on our responsibility at that point because we were amateurs. I was really hoping that with the city clerk running the election, we were going to have a professional election done to the same standards that we've seen with municipal elections. And we saw pretty much the same scope of crap that we saw with our own elections. In fact,
Could you define crap?
it's been mentioned to you already. Kids coming in and voting, people coming with trash bags full, whatever. I mean, it's all the same kind of junk. And then lots of accusations flying about who's doing this and who's doing that. And there is no peace with this. In fact, it's all very, very, very divisive in the community. Some of it has to do with the fundamental nature of neighborhood councils and the way that we define stakeholders. But a lot of it has to do with the way that the city clerk ran the election. The city clerk did not ever consult with me or Susie Rogers, who ran previous elections. The city clerk never talked to us about how do you define a stakeholder, so that when it was pointed out to them that if you're a business and your employees want to send in for absentee ballots, they'll all come from the same fax number. And the city clerk said, no, we won't accept those. So we were fighting during the process with the city clerk, hey, don't you understand the definition of stakeholder? No, they didn't. We were teaching them in the process. They allowed people to vote in multiple districts in the neighborhood council. We have geographic districts. The purpose is to isolate any one stakeholder group so that they can only take over one geographic district or the 3 at-large positions that we have. But it limits any group from doing. They had no understanding of how we had defined stakeholders and why and our past election procedures.
Mr. Garston, I assume you submitted a challenge to the city?
My challenge is incorporated into Mr. Kaiser's challenge.
Okay.
And I
Thank you.
appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
David Raquel Rosen? By the way, can a voter in a neighborhood council election fax in a vote? A ballot?
Good afternoon, or good morning, honorable members. My name is David Raquel Rosen, and I'm the Vice President-elect of the Greater Echo Park Elysian Neighborhood Council, also known as GPENC, a.k.a. Jepnik. I have taken the IEA training. I have taken the conflict of interest training. I have taken all the training that the neighborhood council representatives are supposed to have taken. This was a very close election, and I've reached out my hand to Mr. Kaiser and asked him to be a part of this new beginning that we're having in Greater Echo Park Elysian. This is, I think, as an outreach tool, this has been a great election, because we've gotten twice as many people to participate in this election than we had in the previous election. Kids voting, I think, The kids voting, this is important for teaching kids how to vote. Thank you.
Kids
Yes.
meaning?
Children, 16.
they're
If you can write your name.
16 and above.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that was only changed this last, 2 years ago.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rosen. Sylvia, is it Valle? Sylvia Valle Bonheim?
I've had a stroke, so I speak slowly.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, the committee members, for letting me speak. I wanted to say that I'm against the challenge. I was asked to observe the city clerk's procedures on June the 12th and June the 13th. I've been a gubernatorial and presidential election observer for many, many years, and so they asked me to observe, and I said yes, it would be an honor. We had problems in the areas of the return ballots by mail that came in late. I live in historic Filipino town, 2328 West Temple Street, which crosses Alvarado. We have a large Latino community there, and we also have a large Filipino and a large Chinese community. These are new immigrants. This information, some of it, will not show up on the Census Bureau reports. If you look it up, it will not reflect that. But it's a highly transient area that I live in. Getting back to the day of the election, when I was there in the afternoon until closing time at 8 o'clock, the city clerk's staff, I observed how they counted the ballots. They did an excellent, excellent job. While they were counting and doing their work, there were many disruptions. And in spite of all these interruptions, they were professional. And they just mentally blocked out those interruptions. And they continued with their job, and they finished about 11:15 in the evening. I went to the city clerk's division here, Piper Center, and I observed again. I thought they did an excellent job. And I'm not saying that it was perfect, the mailing and the return, but I think it was superb, the job that they did.
I'm gonna have to ask you
yeah,
to
I know,
close, but
I
thank
know,
you.
but I just speak slowly because of I've had 3 strokes.
Yeah, I think I gave you double time. So.
Okay, but I will put this in writing. But I'm against the challenge. I think it's a waste of time. I think it's a waste of money. I have attended previous elections for this neighborhood council. They were extremely rude, the people that ran the elections, and they made people complained in the community about the racist remarks, and that has to be dealt with. I think I would recommend highly that we have an anger management training and cross-cultural and I'm not being funny because we have. Well, we don't have it in our neighborhood council, but we don't have it in our neighborhood council again. And I would suggest, in addition to the anger management, cross-cultural training, so you won't have this verbal abuse of racist terms used. And that happened last year at the election last year.
Well, thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
Cindy Ortiz?
morning to all. I'm Cindy Ortiz, and I'm a stakeholder of the Greater Echo Park Elysian Neighborhood Council. I'd like to start off, as I said many times before, I deeply believe in the concept of a neighborhood council. It is something that I cherish and I would hate to see go away. But during this time, as a person on the outside looking in, all the effort that I had made as outreach on my, quote, neck of the woods, end of quote, I feel was for naught. And at this time, I need to inform this committee that my neck of the woods is in preparation of seceding from the Greater Echo Park Elysian Neighborhood Council. I'd like to also state that we do not have time to be in the middle of positioning. We have urgent needs that need to be met, and I'd like to submit that from the official community guide, Election Day community guide, this was the last straw. So until everybody gets it together, we'll be glad to join.
Okay, thank you. Item number 3 is regarding information. We're not going to do item number 3. We'll get that on the next agenda. We're done with item number 2.
Can I just,
Hold on.
can I ask something?
Sure.
I just want to know, I mean, clearly I saw you taking notes while you were hearing some of these. I guess for me, I need to know, how are you going to be evaluating
Ms. Hahn,
these elections?
we actually covered that.
Okay.
We covered that in the first part of the
Okay.
presentation.
And how are you getting the information from the neighborhood councils?
I'm concerned because we have not, we've had a bare quorum, and we get in trouble when we don't get downstairs to our meetings. So I don't want to hold Ms. Hahn up, and I don't want to be late as well. Let me say this. I don't take any of the complaints lightly. I hope that they are fully investigated. I know that that the city clerk takes them seriously as well. But I want to get a response to each and every concern that is raised. I think many of the comments are given in the sense of helping to improve the system, and I hope that we can do so as we move forward. And by the way, there's a difference between passion and vitriol, and I think that politics is a very passionate process, and that I encourage it. I think it's necessary in a healthy democracy, but we have to be careful not to step over the lines of vitriol and get to the substance of the issue, so that we can maintain respect for each other, even in our diverse opinions. And there's also the notion of, well, actually, I'm not even going to go there. But the point is that that out of 22 elections, only 6 were theoretically challenged. Several of those received letters of recommendation for improvement. Notwithstanding that, some of the processes that were used that may be questionable were used throughout the system, and we should constantly be looking at improvement. I don't minimize the challenge for the city clerk to run these elections. It was partly my scheme to get the city clerk to manage them for the exact reason that Mr. Dogg mentioned, to try and regularize the process. We expected that because this process was expedited, that we would have, actually I expected more problems in such a short span of time, because I know how difficult it is to run elections. But in 2010, we won't have the excuse of expediting a process. So I want a complete report. And when are you expecting to have that report ready?
Well, we want to get the input from the neighborhood councils, and we're planning to meet with them next week. We have a forum that we've scheduled. So we want to incorporate whatever input we get from them into whatever we report. So we want to have this all wrapped up, as I said, by mid-August, so that we can start moving forward with the municipal election. We'll continue item number 2 until late August, and at that time we will schedule your report.
Okay?
That's fine.
We have,
Councilman, can I make a quick announcement?
oh, yeah.
Karen, at Bungwan Kim, Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, Karen mentioned the public feedback forum. It'll be next week on the 17th from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock at the Board of Public Works. So for those people in the audience, as well as those people listening, I would encourage you to come out and give us the feedback, both on elections administration as well as outreach strategies.
And certainly, if there are folks who cannot attend that, we'll certainly take their comments in writing too, and we'll consider each of those.
Thank you. Is Mr. McQuiston?
He left.
We're moving into public comment. Mr. Zumadog?
Yes, thank you.
And item number 3 on the agenda,
We're moving that to the next agenda.
continue that.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say, in my opinion, the neighborhood council elections, it's not a warm and fuzzy student voting outreach seminar to try to teach kids how to vote. That's what the classroom's for. Have a mock election in the classroom.
Do you have a problem with 16-year-olds voting?
Hey, you got like land use issues, you got alcohol decisions being made, what are 16-year-olds deciding whether you can open up a liquor arcade or something like that? It doesn't make sense, and we need standardization. And so, if you're going to say, well, gee, it's to help train kids, well, that's what the class is for. Have a mock elections. Elections start to elect people. Now, something on a different topic, education, since this is education, and this is quite a treat just to be face-to-face and be a little casual. I'm very concerned with, and I was on Bill O'Reilly yesterday speaking about this. I'm very concerned about with not knowing English as you're going into the schools. And I think that there might be a little bit of something I'd like to work on where maybe people feel if they're teaching their kids English, it might be taking away heritage, taking away culture. I'd like to see an education campaign to say, hey, enhance your heritage, enhance your culture, uplift your generation, succeed, elevate yourself. You do that in school through English. There's nothing wrong with that. I'd love to hear council say that. Thank you.
I agree. With that, this meeting is adjourned.